So I keep starting and stopping these videos, right? Because humor is difficult to talk about, I think. And this week, right, specifically, we are looking at UNESCO. We're looking at the Martin Esslin PDF talking about UNESCO, and we're sort of diving into this idea of humor and what makes humor work. It is a little bit outside the scope of what we've kind of looked at over the past couple of weeks because this week specifically we don't have a book that we're looking at. We're talking more about a concept, again, sort of like we talked about the concept of the absurd, sort of like we talked about the concept of existentialism. And the Martin Esslin PDF, I think, is important because it gives us a good chance to get into Ionesco and to get into who he is as a person before we actually read anything that he has produced, right? And again, right, we're going to be splitting Ionesco up a little bit because of the possibility that we have of seeing the actual play Rhinoceros at the end of the semester at the Capitol Theater, which is going to be a requirement. It's going to pop up, right, and I'll have some better information for you in a subsequent video, right? But when we talk about humor, one of the things that we have to connect with Ionesco is that he does produce a few pieces of work that are supposed to be more objectively funny. And again, I say objectively funny, knowing that, no piece of humor is really objective, right? Many of us find many different things funny, many of us find many things not funny, and there are many cases in which, right, humors do not align. So, what do I mean when I talk about humor, and what do I mean specifically when I talk about humor in the context of the theater of the absurd? Well, we're going to be reading a play called The Bald Soprano. I'm also going to be posting a link to a video of that play, and my hope is that as we watch those things, right, as we look at them, we are going to sort of understand there is a very fine line between humor and, I suppose, fear, right? As we all know, right, it's getting close to Halloween, right? This is a period of time during the year when we tend to think about what scares us, right, and how fun fear can be. And I think that there's a very, again, fine line between what is funny and what is scary. And a lot of that has to do with surprise. A lot of that has to do with the idea of things not being controlled. And if that sounds a little bit like the concept of the absurd, it is, I think. I think that there is a connection between the absurd and horror. I think there's a connection between the absurd, horror, and humor that it seems like it's a fairly easy thing to put together a film that has a lot of jump scares, but that also has humor in it. And that those two things come from the same absurd roots. Ionesco dives into, certainly not horror, but he does dive into what I think we can see is a bit of, if not necessarily frightening things, certainly things that make us uneasy. The idea that our lives are suddenly becoming uncontrolled, that, right, things are changing around us that we have no control over. We like the idea of control. One of the things that the absurd does is it reminds us that we do not have control, or that whatever control we have is not necessarily going to remain something that we can have in our power, right? That we can do everything that we possibly can to remain healthy, happy, in good relationships with people, and that sometimes things just don't work out, right? I think we hear that sort of all the time, right? Oh, it just didn't work out, right? Or, right, that this is an unexpected thing, right? A disease happens, a car accident happens, right? And we think to ourselves, oh, the universe is after us now to get us. Ionesco, I think, puts this into perspective, right? He writes plays that, especially when we see Rhinoceros a little bit later, that dive into this idea that when we are out of control, when the world sort of changes around us, we begin to really question how we relate to others and how we relate to ourselves and what reality actually is. Now, we don't start there. We start with The Bald Soprano. We're going to be doing that next week. I will probably post that link to The Bald Soprano and the video that I would like you to look at this week so that you can take a look at it before we start reading it, right? I think it's important to see this on a stage. I think this is important to experience it in a visual media before we read it, because I think reading it, again, can be really tough. And I believe when I mentioned this earlier in the semester, right, seeing The Bald Soprano was a very, very different experience. Reading it was awful. Did not work for me at all. Seeing it allowed me to sort of take it in and understand it a little bit better. So, in the next series of videos, we're going to talk a little bit about what makes humor, and also what makes Ionesco's brand of humor more or less absurd, I suppose. So yeah, be with you in just a second.